Good morning, and thank you for being with us today. My name is Meeri Economou, and I'm the Chairperson of the Social Security Subcommittee of the Actuarial Association of Europe. I'm really pleased to welcome you this morning in our webinar, How Can We Defend the Public Pension Systems? This webinar is the second one of a series of three we as Actuarial Association of Europe decided to organize after the Social Security Forum in 2023 in order to discuss more in depth the challenges facing Social Security in our times. The second panel discussion in the forum was how can we defend the public pension systems? And here we are this morning with our exceptional guests, André Picard from ILO and Claisse from the UK Government Actuaries Department. Thank you, good morning, and thank you for being with us today. So before we start, allow me to introduce and give the floor to the chairperson of the Pensions Committee of the Actuarial Association of Europe, Mrs. Tatiana Bitunska, to welcome you on behalf of the Actuarial Association of Europe. Tatiana.
Thank you, Maria. Good morning, everybody. It is a privilege for me to open today's webinar, which is organized by Social Security Subcommittee and Pension Committee of European Actuarial Association. All of you are aware about the importance of the pensions. The recent year, the recent even decades show dramatic changes in the structure of demography in Europe. There is a stable trend of decreasing of population, but in the same time, increasing of dependency ratio. This situation shows us a lot of questions to be answered by experts and actuaries. And we are focused on all of this, namely how to prevent poverty, how to deal with pension gaps, how to improve policy for long-term care, and especially in this area, we need not only policies, we need actions. So last but not least, how the actuaries can support European institutions and society in this challenging area. Having that in mind, we focus on a number of actions and webinars to discuss in details different aspects of the pension systems and the issues that pension system face. This is our third webinar for the year, which is assigned for pension issues. We discuss even risk aspects and in this dramatically challenges period for the shifting defined benefit to defined contribution plans in number of countries. That's why we would like to collaborate more efficiently, not only with European institutions, but also with society, and show the importance of information and increasing financial literacy to support in well taken decisions in the future. So our main understanding and the main priorities is how to support healthy public pension, first pure pension system, how to strengthen the position of adequate pensions provided by the second pillar. That's why the role of employers and the consciousness of the employees is important. And on the third plan, the third place, it is importance of the third pillar pensions in all different forms, not only pension funds, but all different saving products and initiatives that financially informed people can take. And that's why I'm very happy that we have today as a presenter André and John, that the both will show the different perspectives for the defense of the public pensions, and to show, of course, the role and support that actuarial community can play in this communication. I'm happy to have also with us Meeri Kesälä, who is chairing the working group on methodology and projections. And Meeri will moderate and facilitate our webinar. Thank you all for being here, and I wish you a very successful webinar. Meeri, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tatiana, and good morning also from me. So I'm Meeri Kesälä, and I'll be as a moderator today. And first, I'll introduce the program for today. At first, I would like to say that we are recording this session, and it will be available on ActiveView afterwards. But now the program is planned for 2 hours. And for the first hour, we will have André Picard from ILO speaking with the title, The Role of Public Pensions in Advancing the Principles of Social Security Enshrined in ILO Standards. And after André, we will have another presentation from John Claisse from the UK Government Actuaries Department with the title, The Role of the UK Social Security System in Supporting Living Standards in Retirement. And after the 2 presentations, we will have time for discussion and questions. So we wish to have all the questions after the both talks, but in case there are some detailed questions or some things that need clarification, we can also accept some questions after the first talk. But how you can ask the questions, we have this Q&A chat, which is available for during the presentations, and you can start writing the questions to the chat, and you can also vote for those questions that you find the most interesting, so we will know which questions we choose if there are very many of them. So feel free to write the questions and vote for the questions also during the presentations. But that was about the program. So let me introduce the first speaker. Mr. André Picard is an actuary, fellow of the Society of Actuaries and of the Canadian Institute of Actuaries. So, since 2014, he is the head of the Actuarial Services Unit of the Universal Social Protection Department at the International Labour Office in Geneva. Since 2014, this unit has conducted over 80 actuarial valuations and other projects related to the design, financing, investment, and governance of social security schemes. Since 2020, this unit also supports countries on ICT, digital transformation, data governance, and interoperability. Prior to joining the ILO, Mr. Picard has been a pension consultant in Canada for occupational pension plans and social security schemes for 27 years. So we are very excited to hear your talk. Thank you, André Picard. I'll give the floor to you.
Thank you, Meeri. Thank you also, Maria. Thank you, Tatiana. I will share my screen. I hope I will make it. I will succeed. Share. Do you see my screen? Okay. So I will start. So good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this webinar. I have to say that it's not every day that I am presenting to such a large audience of actuaries. So I'm very grateful to the AAE for this invitation of being the keynote speaker to this webinar on a topic that is very high on the ILO's agenda. Today, I will address this topic on how we can defend public pensions from the ILO perspective. That is, what is the role of public pensions in advancing the principles of social security enshrined in the ILO standards? Here I have to make a disclaimer that not all opinions that I will express in my presentation reflects an ILO official position. Now, before diving into my presentation, let me start with a quote from Yogi Berra, a famous former baseball coach in the US that you may have heard before. It's a good one for the actuaries. The quote is, "It's difficult to make predictions, especially about the future." As actuary, we understand better than anyone this quote. Yet we are still the ones that people ask to project what will happen in 2050 or 2070, ideally with 2 decimal places and with a confidence interval that makes everyone feel comfortable. So public pension faces a demographic and fiscal scrutiny since many years now. But defending public pension, this is not just about financial sustainability. It's about also social sustainability. It's about social justice and dignity. This presentation will show how ILO principles frame the public pension as a right-based system that embodies solidarity across generations. At the same time, financial sustainability cannot be ignored. In this presentation, I will also explore avenues to address the demographic and economic challenges that most of the country are facing today at different levels, while achieving the ILO social security principles. Since its foundation, the ILO has placed social security at the heart of its missions. Social protection is a cornerstone of the decent work agenda of the ILO. The recognition of social security as a human right is central to the ILO constitutions, its convention and recommendations, as well as in international law. Last week, there was the second World Social Summit for Social Development in Doha. And the first one was in 1995 in Copenhagen. Social protection is mentioned 28 times in the Doha declarations. In this declaration, it emphasizes that economic and social policy must go hand in hand. Social protection must be integrated with broader economic and social policy to be effective. The integration of economic policy and social protection hints that social protection cannot be an afterthought. It needs to be embodied in the architecture of national policy. It underscored in the declaration, it underscored the importance of financing and governance of social protection system to ensure their sustainability and adequacy. And the declaration places social protection within a broader vision of social justice, inclusion, and decent work for all, meaning social protection is part of a package of rights and policy. Here you have the 3, I would say, main convention and recommendation when we talk about when we need to have guidance in our work, at least the actuaries that work on social security and that works especially with the ILO on these issues. You have the convention, Social Security Minimum Standard Convention of 1952. It means that it was ratified as a convention in 1952. We often refer to it as the convention number 102. And this convention sets minimum standards, adequacy, and financing principles. It requires that the benefits are paid as a periodical payment that correspond after 30 years of contribution to at least 40% of the reference wage. It's also said that the rate of relevant benefit must be revised regularly following substantial change in the general level of earnings. and or the level of cost of living. There is another convention, the one that on invalidity, old age, and survivor benefit convention, ratified in 1967, and this is the convention number 128. This convention sets higher standards for invalidity, old age, and survivor benefits, adequacy, and financing principles. It requires periodical payments corresponding to at least 45% of the reference wage. And again, it says that the rates of relevant benefit must be revised following substantial change also in general level of earnings and or cost of living. And you have a recommendation. A recommendation is not at the same level as a convention, but this is a recommendation on social protection floor recommendation of 2012, a much more recent one. This is the number recommendation number 202. It complements the convention 102 and 128 and ensures a basic income in old age. Now I'm going to present you what are these 9 principles that are enshrined, principle on social security enshrined in these ILO standards. First one is the responsibility of the state. The state has the responsibility to ensure the delivery, the administration, and the sustainability. It doesn't mean that the state has to fund or to pay for the benefit. It has the responsibility that it will, the system will remain sustainable. Okay, when we talk about a contributory scheme, for example. It also has the principle of universality. Social security is a human right for all. So to find ways to make it universal. It has the principle of social solidarity and solidarity in financing. And there is a shared responsibility and equitable contributions. You have the principles of predictability of benefits defined by law. Benefits are guaranteed and formula-based. So this is why defined contributions are not acceptable according to this principle, because this is not as predictable as it can be, as a defined benefit scheme can be. Also, the principle of adequacy, it must ensure that people would be able to live in dignity and have sufficient income. It has the principle of non-discrimination, equal treatment, and gender-sensitive system. Another principle is transparency in management, accountable and sound governance. And they have the principle of financial, fiscal, and economic sustainability with due regard to social justice and equity. And it stands for long-term stability and with fairness and solidarity. And finally, the 9th one, we have social partners' participation in the governance of the pension system here. Okay. And these 9 principles, in 2016, ILO, together with the International Social Security Association, we drafted guidelines for actuarial work for Social Security. And the ISA, the International Social Security Association, they have a set of guidelines on like contribution collection. They have like 9 or 10 sets of guidelines. And there is now, since 2016, one on actuarial work for Social Security. And in 2022, because these guidelines are revised every 5 years, in 2022, we revised and we included a guideline 42 on social security principles and minimum benchmark established by ILO standards on social security. This is a guideline. They are not, actuarial standards, but there are guidelines that we, ILO and ISA, encourage actuaries in social security institution to follow when they do actuarial valuation. And this is something also that we are asking to all the consultants that we hire at the ILO when we do work to have this in mind, these principles, when they are conducting actuarial valuation and have to recommend modifications to ensure the long-term sustainability, but at the same time ensure the social solidarity in financing, the adequacy of benefits, and all these 9 principles. Now, if we look now, we will move to now, yes, for sure, but how can we ensure, I mean, financial sustainability, but again, at the same time, social sustainability? We start here with a very simple formula. The cost of old age pension is really a function of 2 things, demographic and 2 ratios, demographic and replacement ratio. The cost of the old age pension, when you express it in percentage of insurable earnings, what we call pay-as-you-go rate, this is the total pension expenditures divided by the total insurable earnings. That can be expressed like this also. Number of pensioners times average pension will be the total pension expenditures, and the total insurable earnings, number of contributors times average insurable earnings. That again be separated between number of pensioners divided by number of contributors, multiplied by the average pension divided by the average insurable earnings. And these are the 2 ratios that I'm talking about, demographic ratio time replacement ratio. We can look at it also on a graphic. When you look at the population, when you project, all the populations show a curve like this on the demographic ratio of number of pensioners over a number of contributors. Like here in this example, it starts around 30% and it increases over a 40-year period, 42 years exactly period, to 80%. If in your system you are replacing 50% of like the average pension of your system replaces 50% of the average earning of those who contributes, then your pay-as-you-go rate is simply the multiplication of these 2 curves, and you see that it starts just like here, just above 15%, and ends up around 40% of payroll of the average pay. Okay. If you, so what are the 4, like I would say, levers that you can use to reduce the cost? That is, you reduce the pay-as-you-go rate. You can either reduce your demographic ratio and or reduce your replacement ratio. So for this, when you put the formula, the 4 levers are, first one, you could reduce the number of pensioners. You could increase the number of contributors. You could decrease the average pension, or you could increase the average insurable earnings. To do that, you can increase the retirement age. That will have an impact on both the number of pensioners and contributors. When you project, if you are increasing the retirement age, when you project, the number of pensioners that you are projecting will be lower if you have a higher normal retirement age. And at the same time, you will increase your number of contributors. You can reduce the accrual rates if you have a generous, but here we always says you need not to go below the minimum benchmark of the Convention 102, or reduce indexation. In some schemes, pension schemes, they will increase, they will index the pension after retirement based on the average wage increases. Then you could lower this to say the lower of inflation or wage index. That will have an impact on the average pension. You could increase the coverage rate. In some countries that we work in, a lot of like developing countries, the coverage rate is very low. Sometimes we see coverage rate as low as 10%, 15%. So increasing the coverage rate will increase the number of contributors. Or you could also, but that is not something that is under the control of the social insurance schemes. It is something that I will discuss later on, but have real wage increase that are more in line with economic growth, that will have an impact on the average insurable earnings. So if you have the same demographic ratio, but if, for example, if you index your pension at retirement on inflation and not on wage index, normally when you project, because salary in the average wage will increase at a higher rate than the pension in payment. So normally the replacement of the system replacement ratio will decrease. So that will decrease. So instead of increasing to 40%, that would increase, for example, in that example, to just above 30% rather than 40%. So that is something that needs to be looked at in order to maybe, when you consider how to reduce the cost of a contributory scheme, that is one way that can be explored. Here we'll explain also here very basic principles of funding of pension schemes. In any type of pension schemes, whether it's a occupational pension schemes, a social insurance pension scheme, either fully funded, partially funded, they always have on one side the liabilities and on the other side assets to pay for these liabilities. When you are in the liabilities, it is defined by the benefit policy, and the asset side, it is, driven by your funding policy, how much you want to pre-fund or not pre-fund your liabilities. In a fully funded scheme, all these assets, the funding policy determine that you will be fully funded. So all the assets of the schemes are invested in capital market. The sources of income of the capital market, we all know very well where they come from. They come from equities, bonds, real estates, non-traditional investments such as infrastructures, and also other more complex products like hedge fund, and now a lot of more complex products that exist on the market. If you are a pure pay-as-you-go schemes, you can have the exact same liabilities as a fully funded, but then on a pure pay-as-you-go schemes, your asset on your funding policy is that your asset will be invested in human capital rather than in capital market. And the sources of income from human capital, these are like your number of contributors, the growth in your own number of contributors, and the growth of productivity, because your human capital, the asset, this is the contribution, future contribution of current and future contributors. And these contributors, they come from the number of workers that will come from your population growth, birth, migration, deaths rates, and the other source of income is real wage growth that should normally equal to the labor productivity growth. If you are partially funded, you have the same two, liability and asset. And what we see most often in country we works with, and even in developed countries, you have a small part that is invested in capital market, and the larger part is invested in human capital. But there are now two challenges, and when we talk about the demographic and fiscal pressure, there are two challenges for pay-as-you-go or partially funded schemes that exist. First one is salary growth does not follow productivity growth anymore. Here, I will show you an example from Canada. As mentioned, I'm a member of the Canadian Institute of Actuaries, so I took their statistics to show since the implementation or the start of the Canada Pension Plan in 1966, how labor productivity, which is proxied here by the division of the real GDP divided by number of employees growth, which is the blue line, okay, labor productivity and versus real salary growth since 1966, okay. Over the first 25 years of the scheme until 1991, 66 to 91, the two lines are one above each other, okay. Labor productivity had an average of 1.1% per year growth, and real salary the exact same figure, 1.1 per year of real salary growth. And in 1991, we observed a disconnect. Even if like from 1991, the next 30 years to 2021, the average labor productivity was the same as in the previous 25 years, 1.1% per year. But the real salary growth has been only less than half of it at 0.5% per year. What it does it means that the labor share of GDP in Canada has decreased. Okay, like in 1991, you can see here it was about around 74%, and now in 2023 it is at 66%, a drop of 8% of the labor share of GDP in Canada. And one could say, yeah, but it also decreased here from 76 to 66, but it increased after until 1991 to approximately the same, even higher than the level it was in 1966. And this is not only observed in Canada, it is observed this decrease in wage in the labor share of GDP in the EU country and a non-EU OECD country. You have a graph from 1953 to 2023. It shows that this labor share of GDP has decreased. So it means also that the real salary growth has not followed labor productivity growth. And this is really concerning because this is one of the two sources of income for pay-as-you-go scheme. Second challenge, especially in EU countries, employment is projected to decrease in most countries. If you're probably more aware of the EU aging report that I'm aware of, but when you look at these reports projection, and I did some additional calculation to project the evolution of employment, okay, until 2070, okay, it shows that the employment rate of the population 2064, it is projected to increase from about 75% to 79% in 2070. But despite this higher participation in the employment rate, the working age population will decline by around 12% in the EU country. So it means that employment is projected to fall by about 8 to 10% by 2070. Employment may grow in Ireland, Luxembourg, Malta, Sweden, but will decline sharply in Eastern and Southern Europe, as this graph is showing here. It shows if you look at, for example, Lithuania and Bulgaria, it will decrease by 30% until 2070. Even Latvia is worse than this at probably around 35%. And these projections do not yet reflect the impact that AI has started to have on employment. Now we hear more and more that in law firms, like lawyer with less than 5 years of experience are almost not needed anymore because they can ask to do the same job to ChatGPT. Yeah, that will be much faster. But we could expect that if with AI, labor productivity will increase. But the big question, as we have seen in what happened since 1991 in Canada and even more in other countries, what share of this productivity gain will be reflected in real wage growth, of this share of labor productivity gains? So in this context, from an ILO perspective, what can be done to achieve these 9 ILO principles? First thing that could be done, this is really, when I say that this is my own opinion and do not reflect the ILO official position, it's on these avenues that I'm talking about. First one is intergenerational solidarity, meaning that higher contribution rate that will be paid by future generation of workers. Or you could rely more on multi-pillar system with a reduced pillar 1. Here, I think where I have a difference when we talk about pillar than the presentation that Jan will make later on. At the ILO, we start with a pillar 0, which is a universal, and then I will explain in the further slide. And then this pillar 1 is the contributory social insurance schemes or for pension. You could also think of having innovative ways to finance contributory scheme rather than the usual employer and workers contributions. Or a fourth one, combination of innovative financing and a higher pre-funding of Pillar 1. This is relying more on capital market than on human capital. So we will look at each of these 4 possibilities or 4 avenues to explore. First one, intergenerational solidarity. Give an application, what I call of the scale premium system. And this is mostly how a lot of social insurance schemes are financed with a scale premium system where every 10 to 15 or 20 years, the contribution rate will increase. And what does it mean, intergenerational solidarity? First, I mean, even intragenerational solidarity that we are more, I would say, knowledgeable of. We can talk about horizontal redistribution. An example of horizontal redistribution is maternity scheme where male will contribute. This is a redistribution from male to female for the benefits. Vertical redistribution, it's a redistribution of the higher earner to the lower earner. You see that in pension schemes where you have a minimum pension that increases the cost of the scheme. Then this is a redistribution from the higher earner to the lower earners, which is called a vertical redistribution. But intergenerational distribution is also a form of vertical redistributions. The basic principle on which all social security schemes were established is that future generations of workers will be wealthier than current generation of workers, meaning that they will be able to afford to pay a higher contribution rate. An example of this is if we assume real wage increase of 1.5% per year, like wage increase above inflation, in 2070, the average worker's wage will be almost twice in constant currency today's average worker's wage. In fact, the exact figure is 1.95. So even if the contribution rate of the worker is doubled from 10 to 20%, the average worker's disposable income, that is after payment of contribution, will still be 1.74 times today's average worker's disposable income, rather than 195 if the contribution rate would have been kept at 10%. And this is, I will show you this, I would say an example, I mean, how we get to these figures with a salary, arbitrary salary of 1,000 in 2025. Today's contribution would be 10% of 1,100. So the disposable income is 900. In 2070, with a real wage increase of 1.5%, the wage in constant currency would be 1,954. If the contribution is doubled to 20%, then the contribution would be 391, and the disposable income would be 1,563. This is this 1.75 times the disposable income if you divide by 900, 1,563. So the workers, if the contribution rate had been kept at 10%, here the disposable income would also be 1.95, but it means that the workers are willing to share a part of their productivity gain, and this is the big question. How much of their productivity gain, real wage increases, will future generation of workers will be willing to give up in the name of intergenerational solidarity? Here, well, again, I will give my own example of Canada. When I started my career a long time ago in 1986, okay, I was contributing to the Canada Pension Plan 3.6, not myself, it was share half and half with employer, 3.6% of wage. But yeah, starting the next year, I started my career in 1987. That is 21 years after the start of the Canada Pension Plan. They had realized after a few evaluations that that would not be sustainable for a very long period of time. So they started to increase the contribution rate from 3.6% over a 16-year period until 2003 to 9.9 of wage. So this is 2.75 times what I was contributing in 1986. And since 2003, I was contributing 9.9%. But I was fine with the fact of contributing 2.785 times what I was contributing in 1986. Why? Because I knew the person for which I was contributing more. I was contributing more because my parents and my grandparents had benefited from this this solidarity. So that was a solidarity with people that I knew very well, my parents and my grandparents. But in the future, I'm not sure that my great-grandchildren, because I'm kind of the first generation that have contributed except for 17 years, the rest I've contributed at 9.9%. But the idea is that maybe my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren, they will not know anybody that had contributed less than 9.9%, and they might not be willing to give up any of their productivity gains. And the other thing that we need to keep in mind also, that this is all other things being equal. But as population is aging, it's a problem. It will not only be with pension, it will be also with health insurance. And so all the costs, there will be higher costs that will be related to the aging of the population. So this is a possibility, but I think we need to think of other possibility. There may be a part that can be absorbed by intergenerational solidarity, but certainly not all the part of the increase in the cost of contributory scheme. The other one is to rely more on multi-pillar system with reduced pillar one. At the beginning, Tatiana was talking about like pillar 3. At the ILO pillar 3, this is the pillar 2. Okay. In some country, what we observe is only a big one, pillar 1, a social insurance pension. Okay. Here, this is a graph where I will demonstrate in the next slide what is the ILO multi-pillar approach to extension of social insurance in all countries, but because ILO, we work mainly in developing countries. Okay, so what can be done is this with this, would say ILO two-dimensional multi-pillar approach to extension, is to reduce with this the size of this pillar 1. Okay, in this multi-pillar approach, there is a pillar 0, which is a universal pension, because we are convinced that the only way to reach all old age citizen, is with a universal pension. Okay, and this is tax finance, and this is pay-as-you-go tax finance. And also in some countries, what we also recommend in order to reach the minimum floor level, I mean, in the horizontal dimension here, it shows like the household income, individual our household income, like and on the left the lower income, and on the right the higher income, and the vertical dimension is about the level of benefit, the adequacy of benefit according to the minimum floor of the recommendation 202 and a higher level of the convention 102. Okay, so in the 0 pillar, you could have a combination of a universal pension plus an incomes or means tested pension that is also tax finance. And then you would have the pillar 1, which is the social insurance pension, okay, that is partially funded. And you could add to this like a pillar 2, which is voluntary pension with employer-sponsored defined benefit or defined contribution, also with individual savings. So if you compare to the graph before, with this social insurance pension was taking the whole space, that can be reduced by introducing a tax finance universal pension, an income means tested, and a voluntary pension for higher income people that can, provide for themselves or with their employers for a higher replacement ratio. And for obviously these pillar here, 0 and 1, are the essentials pillar of a national pension system. The other way also another options to address the issue of fiscal pressure and demographic. I mean, historically, labor was essential for the production and the creation of wealth. But today, what we observe is that the most valuable companies are increasingly, they leverage finance and technology more than the human work. I mean, you certainly know a lot of technology company that are they don't have that many employees, but they are, I mean, valued at the in stock exchange at the very high price. At the same time, wage have stagnated and no longer grow in line with productivity, as I've shown. So because social insurance contribution depends on wage, you have labor-intensive firms that now shoulder a large financing burden, while which lets some of the most profitable companies and those contributing less to employment creation off the hook. So having levies on automation or AI that could ensure that technology-driven growth still supports social insurance. And with the rise of outsourcing and complex value chain, combined with persistently high level of informal and self-employment, firms now they benefit from efforts of workers whom they do not directly employ, and thus contribute less to financing social insurance. You see new models now that recognize that employers benefit directly from non-salaried work. In Portugal, for example, contractors pay for self-employed workers coverage. In India and Indonesia, construction sectors, the contribution are paid by the main contractors for the coverage of employment injury. Now also you see that in digital platforms, you could see contributions on turnover or digital transaction. And in Brazil, for example, the unemployment protection is linked to company revenue instead of payroll. What else could be done? I mean, you could also look at complementary corporate and fiscal measures. Expanding the tax base to include profit would ensure long-term sustainability. Align social insurance funding with global tax reform, having minimum corporate tax, for example. Combining tax finance minimum protection, I mean, this is like the universal one, with contributory schemes will build resilience and universality. What are the principles? The principles are to reinforce solidarity between the capital and the labor, to extend the protection to informal and self-employed workers through innovative levies, and maintain fairness and sustainability while ensuring broad social justice. Social insurance funding must evolve alongside the changing structure of work and production to realize the principles of solidarity, collective financing by labor and capital, as well as redistribution and risk sharing. Another avenue is to combine innovative and higher pre-funding of Pillar 1 pension. In the context of a shrinking employment, as we have seen will happen in Europe, and real wage growth that does not follow labor productivity anymore, the cost of accrued benefit can hardly be supported only by solidarity of future generation of workers. This cost should be financed at least partly by innovative way of financing that I presented in previous slides. So even in the contributory schemes, I mean, we could expand the base for contribution to something that is beyond the wages. So that would that is something that should be done. And that should be done maybe for the past, because the cost of the past now that have been accumulated in contributory schemes is huge, and in some countries that could help by having part of this cost, and maybe ideally the entirety of this cost, of the past, that would be supported by a larger basis. And for the future benefit accrual, if we believe that productivity gains will, or economic gains will continue to benefit more the capital market than the human capital, then the contributory pension schemes like the Pillar 1 should probably be more pre-funded in order to benefit from those productivity gains. However, this shift from human capital to capital market, that will have to be, this is a shift of the risk, and there are also risk in the capital market that will need to be better managed if the contributory schemes are more funded than in the past. And this is what the Canada Pension Plan decided to do in 2019. The Canada Pension Plan was expanded. It is called the Additional Canada Pension Plan, and they decided that the Additional Canada Pension Plan would be fully funded. The basic Canada Pension Plan is partially funded. It is quite well partially funded because it's above 20%. I think it's close now to 25%. But the Additional Canada Pension Plan, the objective is to be fully funded, and they set the contribution rate. So this is an additional 8%. The Canada Pension Plan replaced 25% of the worker's wage up to what they call the yearly maximum pensionable earnings. And they added on top of it an additional 8%, but this additional 8% to bring to 33% will only be for those who will retire 40 years after 2019, so in 2059, because this is fully funded, and they decided that they would not do an intergenerational solidarity on this part, because Canada also will see a flattening, if not a decrease in employment in the future. And it also, as you have seen, the real wage, it does not follow also the labor productivity gains or growth that, as we have seen in the graph before. So that is ending my presentation. I think I'm ahead of time, but I will be open to your question after Jan's presentation.
Thank you very much, André, and this was an extremely interesting presentation, and we are looking forward to get questions also from the audience then after both of these presentations. And I don't see yet any questions. Of course, there is no hurry, but feel free to ask the questions at the Q&A chat. And thank you again,
thank you,
André, and we will come back to you after Jan's presentation. So then I will introduce the second speaker. So John Claisse is the head of pensions policy and social security at the UK Government Actuaries Department. And in this role, she oversees all the department's work on social security, covering the review of the UK National Insurance Fund in every 5 years and the annual operating report, as well as the department's social security work for UK Crown dependencies and some other countries. Jan also has extensive experience in public service pensions, having led the public service pensions teams at the UK Government Actuaries Department for 5 years. Prior to joining the department, Jan spent over 15 years as an actuary in the private sector, specializing in pensions consulting. So thank you very much, Jan, and we are looking forward to hear your presentation on the and I'll give the floor to you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Meeri. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to share my slides and then hopefully, has that worked? Is that okay? Right, I'll press on. Right, thank you, everyone. It's great to be here today talking to you about the role of the UK social security system in supporting living standards in retirement. As Meeri said, my name is Claisse. I'm an actuary and I'm head of pensions policy and social security at the UK Government Actuaries Department. In my role, I have oversight of all of our work on the policy design and management of pension benefits for both the public and private sector, including state pensions, reviews of the National Insurance Fund and reviews of the state pension age. I've been working as an actuary for over 20 years and I started my career in the private sector before moving to the public sector around 8 years ago. So before I move on, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about GAD. We are UK civil servants. We're a non-ministerial department and we provide impartial advice and analysis to the UK government, but also to the devolved administrations in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, as well as the wider public sector and also some overseas governments. And in particular, we carry out social security and state pension reviews for Crown dependencies and some other countries overseas. Our people are a mix of actuaries, analysts and specialist consultants, and we cover the full breadth of actuarial fields from pensions, investment to climate impacts and social security. And this unique setup enables us to draw on specialist expertise across a range of areas to inform all of our work. So today I'm going to talk to you about firstly the UK pension system, state and private, and the recent reforms, challenges facing the system, then look a bit more at private pension savings and adequacy, and then finally look at the road ahead, including work from the new Pensions Commission. So the current UK pension system, we have 3 pillars, slightly different to how André was naming his pillars, but I'll explain what they are in the UK. So the first pillar we have is the state pension, which provides a basic foundation for saving. This is low compared to many European countries, although there were significant reforms around 10 years ago. The second pillar is workplace pensions. In the UK, we now have mandatory auto-enrolment with minimum levels of employer and employee contributions. This has led to a significant increase in participation in those schemes, but there are still challenges around whether the levels of savings are enough for a sufficient retirement. Workplace pensions are now largely almost entirely defined contribution, with defined benefit provision mostly limited to public sector, so civil servants, doctors, etc. Finally, we have private savings on top of state and workplace pensions. So this can be through personal pension savings, tax efficient individual savings accounts or property wealth. And across the population, there's a lot of variation in savings within these 3 pillars. So just to give you an idea, a bit more of how provision varies across the population, this chart shows the difference in average income from different sources for groups of the population, and it's split out by income band. So you can see the state pension, which is here in green. It's quite similar across all the income brackets, which reflects that it's intended to provide a basic level of income across the whole population. But for these lowest income bands, you can see there's relatively little additional private pension or other income, whereas for those in the higher income brackets, they've got significant levels of private pensions and other savings reflected in these sort of reddy purple bars. And actually those in the very highest income bracket have more than 3.5 times more income than those in the lowest bracket. So this just really shows that the state pensions are a very important part of retirement income for the UK population, providing over 70% of the income for those in this bottom fifth, and on average around half of all pension income across the whole pensioner population. So to give you an idea of how the UK compares with some other countries, you can see from this chart of replacement ratios that in the UK down here, the state pension is pretty low compared with some of the other countries, and it's actually probably the lowest out of all of these ones shown here. But when you take the private pension savings into account, it's actually on a quite similar level to many other countries that are shown here in this chart. So now I'm just going to move on to the bit more about the UK state pension system. So I'm not going to go through this slide in any detail. I'll leave it to you to study in your own time if you would like to. But it's really just to illustrate the complexity and the changes that have been made to the state pension over time. So as you can see, there have been numerous changes over the last 100+ years since it was initially introduced, responding to different political and economic challenges and trying to adapt to the changing needs of society. Originally, the basic state pension was established in 1948 as a flat rate state pension, which was available to everyone who paid sufficient national insurance contributions. It was designed to prevent absolute poverty and provide a national minimum. But over time, this sort of simplicity has been increasingly sort of blurred and eroded, largely due to the introduction of some earnings-related elements, means-tested support, and the ability for married women to claim based on their spouse's contributions. And this then led to a very complicated system where many people didn't know what they would get from the state when they retired. And there was also a lot of inequality between men and women and between different groups of the population. So in 2016, the UK state pension was fundamentally reviewed and reformed, shifting back to a single tier system. Let's just have a look at some of those changes. So the need for this review was largely driven by a need to simplify the complexity and to address some of the inequalities in the system, but overall it was designed to cost no more than the previous system. There was extensive government consultation on the reforms, which concluded that a single higher flat rate pension should replace the complex two-tier system. The review at that time set out some clear objectives, which resulted in the new design of the system, including simplicity, clarity, fairness, and transparency, as well as trying to reflect the society in which we live today. And that included things like not relying on your partner's NI contributions, and for people who are self-employed to be treated in the same way as employees for state pension purposes. Under the previous system, around 40% of pensioners were eligible for means-tested support through pensions credit, and the reformers wanted to minimise the need for this means-tested support by setting the flat rate closer to a basic income floor. Another reform was to strengthen the link between national insurance contributions and the benefit entitlement. And so as part of this, equalising the outcomes between men and women was really important, recognising that a much greater proportion of women are now in paid employment compared with when the state pension was originally introduced. In the UK, we have this triple lock, which you may have heard of, in which state pensions are increased by the higher of inflation, earnings, and 2.5% each year. This was introduced in 2011, initially aimed to sort of reverse some of the years of decline in the value of the state pension relative to wages. When the state pension was reformed in 2016, the government committed to increasing the state pension in line with this triple lock. And I will come back to the triple lock and some of the challenges around it a bit later. The number of qualifying years for a full state pension under the new system was increased from 30 to 35, with a minimum of 10 years to receive any pension at all. This is lower than in some other European countries, but it does reflect a lower state pension entitlement overall. And there isn't any credit for contributing for longer than 35 years. And for context, currently the state pension is around £230 per week, which is around 260 euros. So just having a quick look at how the state pension has changed over time. So you can see relative to full-time earnings, started off around 20% in the 70s and peaked around 25% of average earnings in the late 1970s, before steadily reducing to around 15% before the triple lock policy was introduced in 2011. And as you can see from up here, the new state pension was set to be around 25% of average earnings, so higher than the previous basic state pension. So just to bring out some of the features of the UK state pension. So the basic state pension is received by about 98% of the eligible population. Majority of people do receive the full rate, but some people also receive means tested or income related benefits such as pension credit. This chart on the right just shows how the percentage of people who receive means tested benefits has changed over time. And you can see there's a significant reduction following the changes to the state pension in 2016. And to give you a sense of the sort of fiscal impact and the amounts involved, around £138 billion was spent on the state pension in 24-25, which is equivalent to around 5% of UK GDP. And this is expected to increase to around 7.7% of GDP over the next 50 years, reflecting the sort of significant demographic shifts we're expecting in the population. So next, just have a little look at the state pension age. So in the UK, state pension age was originally set at 65 for men and 60 for women, before being equalised at 65 over an 8-year period between 2010 and 2018. It's since risen to 66 by 2020, and there's legislation in place for it to increase to 67 over the next 2 to 3 years. There's a further planned increase to 68, but it's not yet been legislated for. And as in many other countries, this increase reflects increases in life expectancy and a need to share the costs of increasing longevity more fairly between the generations. The UK is different compared to some other countries in that there's no automatic increase to state pension age. Instead, government's committed to regularly reviewing state pension age. There's a review currently underway, which includes an independent review from us at the Government Actuaries Department, where we're considering the proportion of adult life spent in retirement. And this will be supplemented with an independent review on other factors that the government should also take into account. And this approach does enable the government to make decisions based on affordability and their political considerations, but it does introduce uncertainty over future state pension age, which makes it harder for individuals to plan and can reduce confidence in the system. Now, there are a number of challenges facing the state pension system, which are not unique to the UK by any means. Some have already been highlighted by André in his presentation. I thought it'd just be helpful to show these in a UK context and some of the actions being taken and how actuaries can help. So firstly, as we all know, people are living longer, which increases pension costs, but actually healthy life expectancy has not kept pace with this increase in longevity, raising concerns about people being expected to work longer whilst managing ill health. So this chart, which we produced at GAD, shows the change in healthy life expectancy over the last 10 years compared with the changes in average average life expectancy. And this shows that many people are likely to be in poor health when they reach a state pension age. If you can see state pension ages around here. So many people here are likely to be in poor health. Healthy life expectancy has also been reducing over the last 5 years or so and noticeably fallen since the pandemic. As this chart is averages, obviously it hides regional differences, but it gives a good idea of the overall trend. And this provides challenges for policymakers and increases the likelihood of people needing to stop work and claim means-tested benefits before state pension age. The breakdown by gender is also quite interesting. It shows healthy life expectancy is actually quite similar for men and women, but actual life expectancy continues to show a sort of almost 4-year gap. This is known as the gender health paradox, and is where it's not unique to the UK. Across all regions of the world, women tend to live longer than men, but experience more illness, disability, and poorer health throughout their lives. It's an area where more research is definitely needed to support policy-making decisions and healthcare planning. So just moving back to some further challenges around the state pension provision. There's often regional and other disparities that produce significant differences in life expectancy and health status across different regions and different income groups. Having a uniform state pension age affects groups with lower life expectancy disproportionately, and the ability to work longer varies widely by occupation. For example, manual and physically demanding jobs result in an increase in the take-up of means-tested benefits near retirement age as people aren't able to work up until state pension age. On the other hand, some groups contribute for a lot longer but don't receive any additional benefit through the state. Next, we have affordability and triple lock. So state pension is a large area of public spending, And as the dependency ratio rises, governments face a difficult trade-off between state pension age increases, tax rises, or spending cuts elsewhere. As I said, one of the main contributors to this cost in the UK is the triple lock. But while it's helpful for maintaining pensioner living standards, it creates a significant amount of uncertainty on future state pension spending. There's been quite significant volatility of the triple lock costs over the last 15 years, and there's no reason to suggest that won't continue to be volatile in the future. And actually, current estimates suggest that the triple lock has already cost around 3 times more than initially expected. Political sensitivity. So changes to the state pension are a highly politically sensitive topic. There are lots of commentary around how much the state pension costs, particularly triple lock, and that it's unsustainable in the long term. In the UK, successive governments have committed to maintaining the triple lock, and there's no political will to make any changes due to the impact on pensioner living standards. And then this brings me on to the final challenge, which I'm going to explore in a bit more detail, which is around intergenerational fairness or solidarity, as André referred to it. So in a pay-as-you-go system, as we have in the UK, it means the current working age population are paying for the retired generation. And André explained quite a bit around the impact of this on financing of those systems. So the implications for this on the younger generation is that they face higher state pension age, less generous workplace pensions, and greater uncertainty than previous generations. And the UK, again, is facing similar demographic challenges as other countries. We have a rise in the number of retired people compared with working age people, largely driven by increasing life expectancy and lower fertility rates. This is offset to some extent by the net inward migration to the UK, increasing the number of workers. So let's look at these demographic challenges in a bit more detail. This chart, which was produced by GAD as part of our 5-yearly review of the National Insurance Fund, shows the projected change in the number of children, working age people, and pensioners over the next 65 years. And then this blue line shows the old age dependency ratio, which you can see increasing quite significantly from under 30% to over 40% over this 65-year period. This leads to challenges for policymakers who have to make difficult decisions over the provision of state pensions and affordability. I thought it'd also be helpful to show you this chart, which was also produced by GAD and shows the projected increase in spending on state pensions over the next 65 years and the reasons for this increase. This shows the main reason by far is this projected increase in the number of people in receipt of the state pension, this big pink block, which is driven by increasing longevity and the shape of the population as more people move to become retired. The triple lock shown here in orange has a not insignificant effect as well. But what this chart doesn't really bring out, but is very important, is the potential volatility in the triple lock and what impact this could have on future state pension spending. This is an area that actuaries can add a lot of value in helping governments to understand the risks and uncertainty of their policy decisions. So coming back to other aspects of intergenerational fairness, so we have housing and other wealth inequalities can be exacerbated in retirement. And one aspect of this relates to home ownership compared with private renting. So people who don't own their home outright in retirement will need a higher income to cover rent than those who own their own home. And this has a big impact on the adequacy of retirement income for different groups. In the UK, increasing numbers of people are reaching retirement not owning their own home and so needing a higher income to cover rental costs. On the other hand, some people are relying on their property wealth to support their retirement. And my final point on intergenerational fairness is around fiscal concentration, and this is sort of the amount of public spending on pensions, which is increasing as a share of GDP as the population ages. This is essentially a tax on current workers to cover the entitlement of older generations, which may not be fiscally sustainable and could lead to lower state pensions or higher government debt in future. And this again leads to difficult decisions for governments who have to trade off between protecting pensioner incomes now and political implications compared with ensuring long-term fiscal sustainability and fairness to younger taxpayers. So for the final part of my presentation, I wanted to cover workplace pensions and adequacy of overall retirement provision. As I mentioned earlier, the UK introduced mandatory auto-enrolment into a workplace pension scheme over a 6-year period up to 2018. It's been really successful in increasing pension scheme membership for those who are in employment, but it doesn't cover people who are self-employed. Under auto-enrolment, employers must automatically enrol their staff into a pension scheme when they join, and the scheme must have minimum levels of contributions of 3% for the employer and 5% for the employee. Employees can opt out, but the evidence shows that very people actually do opt out, and that this has been a very successful policy nudge to increase participation in workplace pensions. The challenge we have now is whether 8% minimum is sufficient to achieve a reasonable income in retirement, and is there actually a generation of people who are under saving? This chart just serves to illustrate the success of auto-enrolment in increasing the coverage of people saving for a pension. You can see that up until the point that auto-enrolment was introduced, the number of private sector employees in a pension scheme was steadily declining, and then it sharply increased over the period. So we're up to almost 90% of private sector employees and just above 90% of public sector employees who are saving into a workplace pension. But you can see down here in blue that the self-employed, there's quite significant numbers of them who are not saving. We've only got almost 20% who are saving, so a significant coverage gap amongst the self-employed. And then this brings me on to the challenges of adequacy, which is sort of brings together a lot of what we've discussed today. So despite the increasing generosity of the state pension through the triple lock and the reforms in 2016, recent studies suggest a significant proportion of the UK may not be saving enough to achieve an adequate retirement income. The reforms to the state pension has helped reduce reliance on means-tested benefits, but compared to European state pension systems, the UK has a much greater reliance on private pension savings, and that brings significant individual responsibility for saving for an adequate retirement. The auto-enrolment, as I said, has widened coverage, but research consistently shows these minimums are insufficient to reach a comfortable retirement income unless additional contributions are made. There are gaps for certain groups of workers, including self-employed and casual workers, where there's no mandatory workplace pension. Women also are much more likely to have career breaks or work part-time, leading to lower private pension savings, despite the reforms to the state pension that improve credits whilst out of work. The rising state pension age also delays access to state support, so forcing those who are in ill health or with low savings to rely on means-tested benefits to bridge the gap to state pension age. With the shift from defined benefit to defined contribution pensions, there are adequacy risks for the defined contribution pots as longevity increases, and these outcomes also depend on investment returns and decisions made by individuals. This increases the need for financial literacy quite considerably and puts the onus on the individual for an adequate retirement income rather than on the state or the employer. And as mentioned already, many UK retirees are relying on their housing wealth for adequacy in retirement, with much disparity across the population. So what can be done about this? Well, the UK government is very aware of the issues around adequacy, and as a result, this year has launched the Pensions Commission to look into these issues. The Pensions Commission has been tasked with reviewing the long-term future of the pension system, with particular regard to adequacy, fairness, and that's fairness also for lower income and underrepresented groups, and sustainability of the system. There's a separate independent review of the state pension age, including analysis from GAD, which will sit alongside the work of the Pensions Commission. Now, there are many different ways of measuring what an adequate retirement income is, looking at target replacement ratios or considering minimum income levels needed to support different lifestyles in retirement. The state pension plays a different but very important role in these replacement rates, depending on the level of income whilst an individual is working. But recent research from the DWP in the UK shows that on average, at least 40% of people are not on track to meet their target replacement rates. So that brings me to my final observations. The UK social security system, and in particular the reforms to the state pension from 2016, have been effective in reducing pensioner poverty since the 1990s, but there are still gaps amongst groups of the population. Adequacy of the retirement income in the UK depends on individuals having additional savings on top of their state entitlement. There are risks of under-provision for those without sufficient workplace or private pensions, and a danger that auto-enrolment minimums are not sufficient. The fiscal pressures and the demographic changes, particularly with the projected increase in pensioners compared with working age people, will have a big impact on future government policy decisions. Finally, the social security system is politically very important, and it does get a lot of attention, but it is widely supported by both the government and the general population. So, thank you, everyone. And I think I'll hand back to Meeri.
Thank you, Jan, for the very interesting presentation. And now we have gotten the questions, so we can go to the questions and answers session already. We have a bit more time for that now. And actually, you can still write some more questions, especially to Jan, because you just finished your presentation, so people might have to have some time to write. But we can go first to the questions that are for André. And actually, the first one is a topic that also, Jan, you talked about in your presentation. So maybe you can also answer this question, but I'll read it aloud, and then André, maybe you can say some words. So this is quite long, but first it says, thank you very much for your insightful presentation. You well defined adequacy of benefits, saying that benefits must ensure dignity and sufficient income. Adequacy is often measured as a result of the social security schemes, for example, by calculating the replacement rate. When possible, how can we consider also this variable adequacy of benefits as a target to achieve in an actuarial evaluation when establishing, reforming, or enlarging the coverage of the benefits of a social security scheme, and accordingly drive the labor market policies also taking into consideration this factor?
Okay. Thank you, Meeri. I will start my view on this, and maybe Jan could complete. But this issue of adequacy of benefit, this is a huge issue, in the ILO minimum standard, this is really a minimum, because when I think because I've read the question, and maybe at the same time I can also answer the question of Jonathan about the ILO target or minimum benchmark in the convention that says that a worker that has contributed for 30 years should be able to replace at retirement 40% of his or her previous earnings. But this is a minimum, and that does not fully address the issue of adequacy. And Raffaello was talking about that the adequacy is not something that is can be defined very easily as or to maintain a standard of living in the actuarial words. I recall when I was in the private sector, we had in mind kind of a 70% of your final salary to maintain your standard of living. But even this benchmark of 70% to maintain your standard of living will vary a lot on what was your level of earnings before retirement. If you're in your country, you have universal health care that you have at retirement, or if you have to pay for your own healthcare. So this is, or insure yourself, but contribute, a premium for healthcare are very high. So now there is a concept of variable, I would say, not only adequacy, because I mean, in a system, you, as I mentioned, in Canada, because I'm very well knowledgeable of Canada, we have a system like the one I presented at the beginning, like in my presentation, the multi-pillar approach, where we have a pillar 0, we have a universal with a small clawback for higher earners, but we also have this income tested pension for the lower earner. Okay, that addressed the issue of reducing the poverty. In Canada, the poverty rate of the old age people is 4%. This is much lower than the poverty rate of the non-older, those of the working people. Working age people, poverty rate is more around 12%. So 3 times the poverty rate of old age people. So I think that Canada, they have managed to address the role of each pillar in a system have their own role, and they complement each other, and they should not overlap each other. And I think with this in Canada, they managed to address this. The role of the 0 pillar is to reduce at a minimum the poverty rate of old age people. Okay. So, and we are working right now with a pension reform, not only of the 0, 1, the whole pillar in Cyprus, and we are starting with an approach of how to define adequacy and what is the replacement, the standard that the standard of living replacement rate to maintain your standard of living. And we're starting with this. There are a few papers on now on what is the adequate replacement rate to maintain the standard of living, which is that adopt this concept of variable, which is not the same for all level of earnings. And that is something that needs to be considered when you work on a pension reform and you want to address these poverty rate, what is the adequate or the right replacement rate to maintain your standard of living. You should work on this, and to achieve this, you need to do micro simulation, and this is what also we're doing in Cyprus. We do micro simulation because when you work with averages, you miss a lot of things. So we look at different profile with a micro simulation in order to address where do we catch those that is at risk of poverty, and to maintain also what is like for a second pillar, what should be the appropriate people that we are targeting that should be contributed with either mandatory participation or auto enrollment in a second pillar. So that I would say my answers to Rafaelo's, and at the same time, Jonathan, and questions.
Thank you, André. Do you have something to add, Jan, on this adequacy?
I just definitely agree with what André said, that it really depends on someone's income level, really, what the sort of right target replacement ratio is. There's been quite a lot of work done by a sort of pensions body in the UK looking at different income standards rather than replacement rates, looking at kind of how much you would need to have a sort of minimum level of income or a sort of comfortable, moderate retirement, and then looking at who's sort of on track to receive those different levels. And so it is quite stark that most people aren't on track to receive a sort of moderate, sort of an income to maintain a sort of moderately comfortable lifestyle in retirement. And the other big factor as well in the UK is around housing costs, because we do have universal free healthcare, but if you have to pay for housing rent in your retirement, then that's kind of a big extra cost that you will need to have sufficient pension to cover.
Thank you, John. We can go to also to some other interesting questions that are here, and I think then we will move from adequacy to the other side, so the financing. And there is one question for André on this. Does the scaled premium method, working by relying on intergenerational solidarity, rely on benefit indexation being lower than real earnings growth, and or is it assuming on relying on population growth?
Yeah, this is a very good question to clarify. Yes, as I also put in my presentation, all, if not most, if not all of the public pension schemes have been established on the principle or on the premise that future generation of workers will be wealthier than today's generation of workers. Okay, then being able to afford higher contribution rate. It has also been on the principle that population number of contributors would also always kind of increase employment. So that was maybe a small oversight of actuaries of the 1960s or 1950s, but it's easy to say that now. But when they were living in an environment like in, I recall that in Canada in the 1960s, like fertility rate was like at 4 children per woman. Maybe then they would have never thought that it would decrease at 1.4, even less than 1.4. So I mean, I don't want to blame the actuaries at that time, but this is on this premise that was set up. On also intergenerational. This is a social contract. If you go in a note to the National Account of Canada, when they talk about the Canada Pension Plan, it is well stated that this scheme has never been intended to be fully funded, and that it is a social contract according to which today's generation of workers accept that part of their contribution, if not all, but part of their contribution is used to pay for the pension of today's pensioners, and that creates rights for these workers that when they get to retirement, future generation will pay also for their pension. This is the basic of social insurance for pension. And also the idea on this, the ILO also, this is when somebody gets to retirement, okay, that person should be able to maintain his or her purchasing power. Okay, so cost of living, not necessarily include in this the labor productivity on top of it, making it as a wage index rather than cost of living. And as we have seen, at least in Canada before 1991, if real wage increase at a rate higher than inflation, then I mean, the one who asked the question is right. That's rely also on the fact that wage growth will be above inflation, meaning that on the long term, the schemes also rely on the fact that, and Jan presented that with this triple lock, that creates also a burden on the system. So yeah, I mean, he's right that we are relying on an increase. We're also relying on this other, as I present, there are two sources of investment income when you rely on human capital, growth in employment or in contributors, and growth in real wages. And if that is not true, if the growth in real wages doesn't follow labor productivity, the avenue that we need to explore is to capitalize more, to fund more the contributory scheme. I'm not saying going to 100%, but at least to be more funded. So it means to increase right now the contribution at a higher level in order to put aside some money and then benefit from the economic growth that is going in the pocket of the capital holders.
Thank you, André. And you mentioned this triple lock, and actually there is a question for Jan in the chat about this. So maybe you want to comment this, Jan. So the question is the triple lock sustainable with the current high inflation rates and expected continued high inflations on food, rent, energy, and so on?
That's a very good question. There've been a lot of commentary and studies and sort of estimates of the cost of the triple lock, and we've done some as well at GAD as part of our work for the National Insurance Fund. And there's and it's very politically sensitive around whether it should stay or not. But it is, I think it's just the potential volatility around it and the sort of uncertainty around what it might cost with the inflation or earnings or 2.5% a year, that means that there's just a really wide range of outcomes around what the cost of it could be. And that just provides a lot of challenges for the government when they're trying to set their policy. But is so politically sensitive that any sort of suggestion that it might be taken away becomes a sort of, hurting the pensioners and taking money away from people who can't have as, don't have as much ability to then save now if they're not working. So yes, it's definitely arguable whether it is still sustainable, particularly in the current high inflation environment.
Thank you, John. There is another question on a topic you, André, mentioned already. So maybe you want to say more on that. So the question is, AI will probably further reduce labor participation, as you already mentioned. So taxing labor will be less effective and not sufficient. Certainly for countries like Latvia, taxing capital will be difficult due to the small economy. How could we solve this?
Yeah, this is a challenge. I mean, Latvia is the country where the employment will decrease the most in the next 45 years. So this is a big challenge if the capital market there is, but I mean, is not that big, but it doesn't mean that you cannot invest on the investment side. You cannot tax capital market in the other countries to finance the national schemes, but you can invest more in the capital market, not only in the country, but in Europe, also in non-European countries, in all the capital market that exists, in order to pre-fund more. This is the other option in order that worker benefit more from the capital market. If in an environment where employment is shrinking, I mean, you need to pre-fund more. So you need to do some actuarial studies to identify which part, if there is a small part, you should maybe use it in order to enlarge or broaden your possibility, your fiscal space to finance even the contributory scheme, or maybe to finance a universal. I don't know the Latvia system, I have to admit, but if there is no tax finance universal pensions or means tested pension, if there is not enough space, maybe there is enough to, I mean, the idea is to protect first the most vulnerable one, and then to allow other people to either contribute more. I think you need also to provide this minimum of 40%, okay, with tax finance and contributory, maybe finance more the contributory part on a defined benefit basis, because the ILO, this is really defined benefit that needs to be provided for the first 40%, and then give space for the higher earners to contribute to second pillar, employer-sponsored or individuals with tax incentive, because for the higher earners, the first incentive to put money aside is the tax deduction. So that's one of the things that need to be considered to incentivize people to have adequate and maintain also, if possible, their standard of living at retirement.
Thank you, André. So it seems that we have nicely haven't gotten many questions to the chat, but I could also ask to Maria or Tatiana, do you have questions that you would like to ask?
Okay.
Sorry, Maria, you are first.
Thank you. No, from my side, yeah, I had some questions, but allow me to make a comment. When we had the Social Security Forum, and in the second panel discussion, it was from our audience, we received, let's say, as feedback that one of the main challenges we need to face in order to defend the public pension schemes is when designing policy to cater for different profiles amongst individuals protected under Social Security. I was really pleased to hear André to mention earlier that in Cyprus, they do micro simulations in order to go in specific different profiles of individuals, because that average person at the end of the day doesn't give any conclusion on how to go ahead. So I feel that to some extent we offered some feedback to our audience in Social Security Forum, who are also our audience today, and I'm very happy about it. So because there are a lot of questions, I only wish to ask Jan the following, which we also discussed. You mentioned that government is committed to regular reviews. So can you explain a bit more about what these regular reviews involve and how any recommendations are taken forward and implemented by the government?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Maria. And you're talking about reviews to the state pension age, aren't you? I think, I can't remember quite how many reviews there have been, but government basically realised that longevity was increasing, but the state pension age hadn't kept up with that. And that was obviously increasing the costs of state pension. So government committed to regular reviews. Now, they didn't sort of legislate for every increase, and they haven't written into legislation automatic increases, but what they will do is every 5 years commission us at the Government Actuaries Department to do a review of the proportion of adult life expected to be spent in retirement under the sort of current life expectancy projections. And then they also will commission an independent expert to talk about other factors that will also impact on state pension age. So I think that will cover sort of political, economic, healthy life expectancy, and sort of a wider range of sort of social and other considerations. And then those two reports are then presented to the government, and then the government then makes a decision around what they want to do on the state pension age. So there isn't an automatic they must do what we say in our report. It's a sort of, that's part of the evidence for their decision making.
Okay, thank you very much, because that's always important to understand the government, in fact, is committed, which is not, because in Europe we face the difficulties that actually say one thing and politicians completely different thing. Thank you very much. I have no other questions. Mary.
Thank you. And Tatiana, you had some question also.
Yes, I would like first to thank both our presenter for the extremely interesting presentation and for dedication that they put for our event. Regarding the point that Maria mentioned, simulation in Cyprus is something that should be done on any national, or in any country on national level, because the situation, environment, and the parameters from economy and fiscal policy are very specific and quite different from country to country. I remember on one of the last IOPA online events, there was a OECD presentation on setting benchmarks for replacement rate ratio in different groups depending of the level of income before retirement. So I remember by memory that roughly some artificial criteria were set between 40 and 62%, but aiming higher replacement rate for the low income population. That make especially from my perspective, big sense. I have a question or comment to both our presenter, taking the point from Jean's presentation. In UK, public pension expenditure were mentioned to be around 5%. in my country, in Bulgaria, let's say, there are above 10% of gross domestic products, which is absolute amount and nominal value relative to GDP looks very nice. But in the same time, the 50% of these public expenditures are on deficit. So they need to be financed additionally from the taxes, and that makes burden even higher for the working population. So it seems that it is very disputable what of the 4 elements which were mentioned in the ILO recommendation for improving this coefficient need to be approved. But for every such thing, we need political willingness. And is there a good recipe how to keep in the healthy condition our public pensions? Will be better to reduce the average pension income and to have such a flat rate like in UK, or it is more important public pension to consider individual contribution for every pensioner when the pensions are defined by the state side?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think a lot of it depends on what the state's sort of trying to achieve with the provision. Do they want it to be a minimum income level? Do they want to provide for sufficient retirement income for everyone so they don't need to have additional savings? And then I think making sure that the population understands that that comes with a cost and how that's going to be financed. So in the UK, it's a pay-as-you-go system, so there's no there's sort of notional national insurance fund, but it's sort of all financed on a pay-as-you-go basis. There isn't a sort of specific fund sort of set aside. Whereas, yes, obviously in other countries there is, that is sort of a ring-fenced fund that's used to pay those social security benefits. So yeah, I think it's sort of considering what the objectives are and what the government wants to achieve, and then what is able to also afford, and trying to bring all that together.
Thank you.
Thank you. And maybe we'll go back to the questions from the chat, since there are already very many. One important thing is in this question from Andrew Young, which says that demographic changes can be expected to increase demand for and the cost of healthcare and social care even faster than the cost of social insurance based on pensions. That will increase the pressure on limiting the cost of social insurance pensions. Do actuaries take this into account enough? I could also add to this about the meaning of long-term projections. We know that actuaries make projections on pensions, but is there some official institution like in the UK who does projections on healthcare and long-term care?
Yes, really important. Yeah, really important for actuaries to take into account, because like the question says, there'll be a big cost of social care and healthcare, which sort of combined with the cost of providing for pensions. Now, we don't specifically do that at GAD, but we have, there's a sort of another department called the Office of Budget Responsibility who do projections of the sort of costs of social care and healthcare over the next sort of 50 or so years. So it's definitely is projected and provided to the government when they're looking at their future forecasting. But yeah, definitely it's something else for actuaries to be very aware of when looking at costs of social care and social security systems in general.
Yeah, maybe.
André wants to
yeah, on this I would add that because we do at the ILO also, I mean, actuarial valuation or projection of healthcare insurance or universal healthcare to project the cost. The thing is that for healthcare, we never project or for healthcare insurance or medical insurance, we don't do projection for more than, I would say, 10 years. I don't know in UK, but because of all the uncertainty, the increase, the new technology, the cost of healthcare, it's difficult to project to more than 10 years. Even 10 years, it's a challenge. Okay, while for pension we project for 75 years. So if there is an area of research, I think that area that actuaries should look at is how to match the contribution, not the contribution, the projection of pensions with projection, maybe just for planning on. And there is also a lot of work to do, because if there is an elephant in the room, it's not just the healthcare, but this is the long-term care. And I think we need to develop way also to pre-finance or finance. How do we will finance long-term care in the future? But I think I need to disagree a little bit with Andrew, because I think that the increase in the cost of pensions that are financed, especially the contributory one. So this is why I mentioned we need to broaden the fiscal space to pay for the contributory scheme, or to add tax finance schemes at the base of contributory scheme, because that is something that will increase significantly the ratio of like the demographic ratio. This is a challenge. Okay, but I fully agree that we should be, we should look at it in a whole. And we were working in a country on a reform of the second pillar, which is like a kind of an auto-enrollment scheme. And I was always saying we need also to have an eye on this one, but also an eye on the contributory one, because we need to see what is the projected contribution rate to make the first pillar sustainable, with the minimum requirement of the Convention 102. Okay, because if you want to say we will increase the contribution rate in the second pillar in order to increase the adequacy or the standard of living, maintain the standard of living, you need to see in total how much it's gonna cost in the contributory scheme in the first pillar plus the second pillar. You cannot do it at improve the second pillar to the detriment of the first pillar. You need to look at it as a whole. And the point of Andrew is right. We should look also at it as a whole, also taking into account the increase in the cost for health, long-term care, all the other important, I would say elephant in the room when we are looking at the fiscal space in the future.
Thank you, André. And there's one more interesting topic that we haven't quite gone to. So there is a question to Jan about the auto-enrollment, which says that what is the financial performance of the respective pension funds? How are the members, workers, and pensioners protected from underperforming asset managers? So I would like to add, because also André, you mentioned that we should maybe move the focus of financing, or if it's moving from human capital to investments. And of course there is there's the investment risk, which is high. And how should we meet that? How should we mitigate the investment risk for the pensioners? But maybe because this question was for Jan, you can first answer.
No, because it's very important. Coming from, most of my career, I was in Canada consulting the occupational pension plan that are by law fully funded, and we were working also a lot with colleagues consulting on the investment management, because that can make a huge difference in the long term. But for social insurance schemes, I'm saying to go more in the capital market, but I'm not saying to go fully funded. Okay, so that's one of the advantages of the social insurance, is that in social insurance is not that much the volatility that is the risk. It is I would say, the risk of, in the long term, missing the assumption that is used to set the contribution rate on the long term. So you need to make sure that in the long term you will reach at least the actuary's assumption when the actuary sets the contribution rate. Otherwise, you will be in trouble. So, but you need to manage this the way that the occupational pension plan, and I think that UK has the same culture of Canada, of having huge occupational pension plan, fully funded with investment management committee, and but it's, even if it's only funded at social insurance would be only funded at, like I said, in Canada, they are at around 25%, and maybe we should increase in other countries that are at 5 or even pay as you go to this 20-30% more funded. But the volatility, the nice thing with social insurance, it's only like 30% that you will have a loss. If you with the fluctuation, you can have a loss on your investment, but that loss will then be amortized over the next 50 to 75 years. So the impact on contribution of the volatility will not be that high. The risk is not achieving in the long term the assumption used to set the contribution rate. And for this, actual valuation every 3 years or 5 years will be conducted and can adjust. But the idea is that if you are underperforming your objective, you need to at least achieve the objective of your investment policy. And that needs to be followed closely.
Thank you, André. Jean, do you want to comment?
Yeah, definitely. So on the point about the auto-enrollment and the financial performance of the pension funds, I mean, almost everyone now saving into a workplace pension is in a defined contribution scheme. And so people are building up their own individual pension pots. Within those, I think there are sort of default arrangements that are set up by the whoever's running the funds, but there isn't really any sort of protection around underperformance. All of that risk is now borne by the individuals. And so it's really on to the individuals to choose what funds they invest in, and if they want to make additional contributions. And so that is a real risk in the system now, that people aren't, it requires a lot more onus on the individual to look at what they're saving and look at what the investment performance is and decide what funds they want to invest in, compared with the sort of previous defined benefit world, where all of that was done by the employer, and they paid a lot of experts to work out what the right funding and investment strategy was for their defined benefit schemes. So yeah, it's definitely a big risk on individuals now.
Yes. Thank you, Jan. I'm afraid we might have so little time that we can't go through all of the remaining questions. So maybe I'll give the floor to Maria. You can sum up the afternoon or the morning.
Thank you, Meeri. It was really a fruitful discussion this morning, and I would like to hope that everybody enjoyed it as I personally did. On behalf of the Social Security Subcommittee, we would like to thank our audience who participated in this event, our exceptional speakers, the chair of the Pensions Committee, you, Meeri, as our moderator, and for sure, our colleagues behind the screens who made this webinar possible. We would also like to invite you all in another fruitful discussion, I hope, next year in March, with the hot topic, how can we raise people awareness around pensions? So before, or let's say, closing this event, I would like, instead of saying goodbye, to say, please save the date for March 19, 2026. Thank you very much. Thank you.